Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast. This is Mukunda Raghavan, your host, and today I'm joined by our esteemed guest, Dr. Arvind Sharma, professor of religion and Hinduism in Canada. And he's been, I think right now he's at McGill University, if I'm not correct.
That's right.
Yeah, he's been there for many, many years, and he's the stalwart amongst scholars in Hinduism because he both brings the academic rigor, but he also brings an internal, like, emic perspective to the table, which I think a lot of times Western Indologists don't have the skill set or knowledge necessarily to do so. So, Dr. Sharma, namaskaram, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So,
Happy to be
Doc,
here.
yes, absolutely. I mean, your career is very storied. Can you kind of tell us like your journey? Because I know you actually started studying and became a professor later in your career in life, and you were much earlier doing other things. What was your journey from like a young age? What was your interest in Hinduism and all this?
Yeah, when one came of age, one has to think of a career. And my career started as a public servant. I joined the Indian Administrative Service
Uh-huh.
and was in it for about 6 years in the state of Gujarat. And my reason for entering that service was basically to see how the country is administered. And that curiosity was satisfied after those few years. And so I decided to resume my academic career by enrolling in a program at Syracuse University in upstate New York
Mhm.
for a Ph.D. in economics. And I was an ABD, as it's called, all but dissertation. But when it came to writing a dissertation, by that time I was becoming a bit disenchanted
Mhm.
with economics, in the sense that I perhaps had this naive view that by taking a few courses in economics, one would be able to discover the sources of wealth or poverty of nations. And then one could propose an adequate program for removal of poverty, which was such a feature of our economic life in India. But nobody seemed really interested in it in the department. Although what I did was developmental economics, and that's an accepted branch of economics. But they were using all these formal models to explain development. And I became interested gradually in the role of non-economic factors in economic development. But this did not excite my department. They thought I should just do whatever I need to do, write my dissertation, get my degree, and get a job. But I had a slightly different interest in the subject. And when I became convinced that non-economic factors need to be investigated more carefully,
Mhm.
and especially religion, since it's such an important feature of our national life, I ultimately suspended my program in economics and decided to do a degree in comparative religion at the Harvard Divinity School.
Mm.
And when I moved into this program, which is called an M.T.S, or Masters in Theological Studies, it's a slight misnomer because you could also do comparative religion in that
Right.
program. So that is what I focused on. And then I find the field so intellectually exciting, this whole field of the study of religion, which really doesn't exist in India in the form in which it is pursued in the academia in the West,
Right.
namely what we call the non-confessional or academic study of religion, as distinguished from studying any religion as a believer.
Right.
And I found this whole approach very exciting and very relevant for my own concerns. So I switched to a program in comparative religion and finally to doing a PhD in Hinduism itself.
So, Dr. Sharma, at that time, I mean, has that changed in India? Has India now developed a more academic study of religion, or is it still stuck in the believer kind of study?
We're still stuck in the believer kind of study and also stuck in the illusion that you cannot have a proper academic study of religion.
Right. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
That is puzzling.
Yeah.
It is really puzzling. I think it is the view, the secular view, that religion should be kept out of everything as far as possible.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And certainly the academia, out of the fear that it might become a center for the propagation of a religion or religions.
Right.
So there is a lack of appreciation in India at the moment of the distinction between what is known as the confessional study of religion and the academic study of religion.
They study religion. I mean, from what I can tell, like a place like Delhi University and JNU and a few other places, they study religion historically within a historical context of, let's say, the Mughal period. But I don't see a lot of good work coming out of them about the study of religion as religion.
Yes, that's true. Now, JNU is not the JNU. Jamia Millia Islamia is
Yeah.
one of the few universities in India which did for a while have a program in comparative religion.
Right.
I think the other places are Banaras Hindu University and there's a new university in the Punjab.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Punjabi University. But that's about it.
Right. Right. Like when you were growing up, in your younger years, was your family religious, or were you interested in Hinduism at all in any intellectual endeavor, or was that happened only when you started doing your master's
No,
in
no, I,
theology?
I, I always had interest in religion.
Oh,
That came out of the search for the ultimate explanation of the human condition.
yeah,
Why are we here? What are we doing here? And so on.
yeah,
So only religion really seems to offer uh, some hope or some initial structure, yeah,
yeah.
for pursuing this kind of an inquiry. So I always had interest in that, but my academic studies were purely academic. I
Right.
did economics, I did history, I did a bit of Sanskrit. Uh,
So, what was your focus when you started doing your PhD um, in Harvard at that time?
I had moved to the view that religion is a very important aspect of human life
Mhm.
and very relevant for India, even in the context of its economic development.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
So,
interesting.
yes.
And so what was your like thought process in saying that religion was important in the development of economics?
Well, the view which evolved was that every society or culture has a value system,
Hmm.
and that value system is often rooted in its religious tradition. Now, this is probably less true of the West in modern times
Okay,
than it was in medieval times after the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the Secular Revolution, and so on.
right,
While we in India, because of our colonial experience, were in a position in which we inherited both. We had our religious tradition as a source of value formation, and we had the Western liberal tradition, including the Marxist, yeah,
right.
as a mode of value formation. So my master's thesis was on the role of the scriptural value system of Hinduism and India's economic development.
In a certain time period, or was it like covering a large period of time?
Uh, it was it was not a historical study, but an ideological study.
Right.
Are there ideas within the Hindu system which are congenial towards or for economic development?
It's interesting that you bring this up because even in your book on Manu, that we'll get to, you bring up, I guess, is Angus Denton's work?
Angus Madison,
Angus,
yes.
Angus Madison's work on like basically the economic developments of that of a 2,000 year period and where India stood. And in some ways, it's almost like a study of thinking about it in Max Weberian terms, right? The Protestant work ethic and applying that kind of framework to study religion in and economics in the Indian context.
Yeah, it has elements of that. The regnant paradigm, I think we might need a bit of historical context for this.
Sure.
After the Second World War, social sciences in the West came to be based on a pervasive, if unarticulated, assumption that the world's future, I beg your pardon, that Europe's past was the world's future. That is to say, secularization was a global movement which had started in the West, but is going to sweep the whole world.
Yeah.
And so all our studies were based on this assumption that religion will either, on the Marxist interpretation, disappear from life altogether, or on the liberal one, will be reduced to a private interest, so that the public square would be independent of religion.
Yeah.
And so all our schemes for the economic development of India were, without probably ever realizing it, based on this assumption.
Right.
And under the same assumption, they took a negative view of the relationship of Hinduism to economic development.
Right. The Hindu rate of growth, as they would call it.
That is right. And that was probably the reason why they called it that way, under the influence of this paradigm. Now, my studies in religion seem to indicate that the relationship was more open and dynamic than along the lines usually formulated,
Right.
as rigid and fixed in a negative way. So
Right.
I'm not at all surprised that India's economic leap, as it is occurring now, if we can call it that, takes place under a political party which is supposed to promote Hindu nationalism. So I won't be totally, I'm surprised by this. Though, of
Right.
course, the roots of it go further back. No, we have to acknowledge that. But I'm not at all surprised. For a tradition which regards dharma, arth, kam, and moksha as valid goals of human life,
Right.
it should not surprise us that we are quite capable of attaining artha.
Right, because I mean, like your book talks about too, and many books do, like that study is for nearly a 1,500 year period, the Indian subcontinent and its various dharmic traditions that ruled were economically very, very powerful, and there had a pretty high rate of living standards and growth compared to, let's say, even the Roman West or post-Roman fractured Christendom, right? And it was very interesting because that statistics, because China is also up there too, right? India and China,
Yes,
in that sense, held a significant economic power, and we don't have really many people explaining how religion contributes to that, especially in the Indian context, because it couldn't be the case. I mean, that religion had no impact, right? And that the values of like Kautilya's or the Mahabharata around growth and expansion didn't matter.
Yes, but there's a slight catch there, in
Okay.
the sense that China and India were the main centers of growth and productivity
Yeah.
in the world, but they are also large populations.
Yeah, that's true.
So one will have to look at the per capita situation.
Yeah.
But that's a That's a caveat.
Mhm.
But there is no doubt that both these centers of ancient civilizations enjoyed high levels of prosperity in a comparative sense.
Mhm.
So if we are going to take the view that India was bound down by a rigid caste system
Mhm.
in which there was no economic mobility and life was a burden and so on,
Right.
how do we reconcile this with the picture we have from economic history?
I
Something
mean,
is wrong.
yeah, my guess is like, you would find many people would say, well, only the elites, they worked off the backs of the poor and the downtrodden, and the elites had this power, right? And that's the argument I think they would make. I don't find it persuasive, but no, I think that's how would you respond to that?
Well, the elites, if you look at the literature on the subject, especially the Brahmins, were supposed to be abstemious in their lifestyle.
Mhm.
So this is a problem we have in dealing with the West,
Yeah,
in the sense that status high status is associated with wealth and power.
yeah,
But in the Indian Varna system, the person who has the highest status is the Brahman. And the Brahman is not supposed to chase after wealth or power.
interesting. All right.
And wealth and power and privileges are supposed to go with high status. But in the case of the Varna system, the relationship is inverse,
Right.
especially,
Yeah, sorry.
especially in the context of the leadership of the community.
Right. It's interesting because when I think about the Varna framework, right, it seems to me there's power in each of the Varna categories, right? In the Brahmana Varna category, there's the, let's say, intellectual or religious liturgical power. In the Kshatriya category, military, royal, or just rulership power. The Vaishya category tends to have more of the wealth and maybe
Yes.
agriculture kind of, and then the Shudra category tends to hold the power of the people,
And,
in
and
this
service and
in
service.
service. Yeah.
So this is a very good point. So each of them have some kind of power, but the manner in which they are enumerated gives us an idea of the value which was attached to these kinds of power.
Can you explain? I mean, I think our audience would love to hear that.
Yeah,
How?
that is, well, let me put it this way. Why is the Brahman put on top? Is it because he has wealth or power? He has power? No, because it is with the Kshatriya. Is it because he has wealth? No, because it is with the Vaishya. Is it because he serves the society in general? Yeah, in his own way he does, but not in the way a Shudra does. So he has the highest status and some privileges which might go with it, along with responsibilities, but it does not show the kind of value we have in the West, where highest status is associated with wealth and power.
Mhm.
And this might have been an obstacle in the Western mind, yeah,
Yeah.
for understanding the Varna system. I mean, I'm dealing with it in its ideal formulation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can see that because I think even Balagangadhar kind of brings this topic up in some of his writing too, is when you look at the elites of the West, whether you have, let's say, the Catholic Church, right?
Right, right.
The Pope and the archbishops, they're extremely wealthy. They're
Yeah.
wealthy. They own lands. They're part of the, especially medieval Europe. They're part of like the royal families that came from, many times came from the royal families, and maintain those land grants and those the ownership of these places. And then when you look at the Indian tradition on the whole, you find a clear statements that a Brahmin should live in some level of poorness, and should have some level of meager income and shouldn't be wealthy in the sense of, owning so many lands and having power and being
Yeah.
invested in. So it is interesting because it's requiring a certain level of balancing of responsibilities and privileges.
Yeah. This is some books express it by saying that there was a low level of or low standard of living, high standard of life.
Yeah.
That was the model held up for the Brahman.
Right. Right. So in this context, like so the elite, the Brahmana, doesn't contribute, let's say, economically the same way, let's say, Shudra or Vaishya or Kshatriya does. But how does the Brahmins' responsibilities work in the economy?
Um, it works in the context of society as a whole, that the Brahman is supposed to provide intellectual leadership. So we have the case of Chanakya writing the Arthashastra. Yeah?
Mhm.
So wisdom, the right policy to be followed, these are to come from him. The think
Yeah.
tank, the think tank. Yeah.
Right. Right. So how would you then trace the Varna system and the Jati system that, kind of are a lot of times confused and they coalesce, they move
Yes,
in and out of each other, right?
yes. So actually, the entire history of the so-called caste system in India can be periodized in terms of first phase, in which the main category is Varna. And then when we come around to the turn of the Christian era, especially after that, the category becomes Jati, right through the medieval period.
Yeah.
And when we come to the modern times, it becomes caste,
Yeah.
as the British introduced that concept. Now, the relationship between Varna and Jati is one of those somewhat opaque areas. What seems to have happened is that you had this ideal type of the four Varnas, and you also had communities in the same society which were specializing in certain crafts, and they had their own guilds and so on.
Hmm.
And the relationship between these four Varnas, right from the beginning, seems to be ambiguous.
Yeah.
By the time we come to the Manu Smriti, they are trying to relate the two in a particular way by arguing that the various jatis arose out of the intermarriage among the Varnas.
Yeah.
So they forge a connection. Now, this might seem to us a bit artificial, but the merit of this probably was that it made the whole society of one blood.
Yes. That's an interesting point, right? It's interesting in a variety of ways because I think some people, when they talk about the caste system, their first impression is, well, you guys believe they come from the feet, the lowest people come from the feet, the highest come from the head of a god. So you guys don't see each other as equal. And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, there might be some element of a hierarchical inequality, and I don't think we need to not address that. But I do think clearly, I mean, the argument you're presenting here, and I think it has strength, is if they're all merely a product of interbreeding, like, whether a Parshva it belongs from two Varnas intermixing, or a
Yes,
Sutta,
yeah,
whatever, what you're basically saying is it's all commingled. There's where some sort of unitary whole that has fractured out, and obviously part of this intermarriage stuff is myth making in the sense, right?
yeah,
You're trying
exactly.
to
Yeah,
bring these other people into your fold, and the way you do that is saying, oh, we all you came because two people interbred here, right?
yeah. It's kind of Indian version of, or the Manu Smith's version of the imagined community
Yeah.
of Benedict Anderson, something like that. Yeah, an attempt to create a community. And it's particularly significant because in the time of Manu Smriti, is usually ascribed to 2nd century AD.
Yeah.
And that is a period which comes after 4 centuries of continuous foreign invasions, which shattered India politically.
Yeah.
So that Manu is trying to salvage the situation by focusing on society. Though he also has some ideas about polity.
Right.
But just as nowadays we in India, we have this whole about of should we move to improve situations through the polity, the political system,
Right.
or through society. You get the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha using 2 different approaches. Yeah. So he probably used the focus more on society. And there is some genetic evidence to suggest that endogamy becomes the main feature of Indian life in the post-Christian era.
Right. You know what's interesting, Dr. Sharma, is I had not thought about, and I don't know if I've read this either, about the relationship until you brought it up in the book, the relationship between the 4 centuries of, Huna, Kushana, these various, outside invaders coming
Yeah.
in. And
Hunas
then
come
it's,
a bit later on,
yeah,
but the Indo-Bactrians, the Indo-Parthians,
yes,
the Shakas, and the Kushanas. Yes.
right. That all these, let's say, the Indo-Europeans from the second,
Second
third,
wave. Yes.
yeah, second, third, or whatever it is that's coming in, has changed the Indian understanding of itself and
Yes.
and its society. And it's I did and the placing of Manu in the 2nd century CE is actually very interesting for that argument. Because I mean, how would you respond to the fact that there are the dating of Manu tends to range widely, right? Some people put it in the 2nd, 3rd century BC to 4th century CE, and I mean this is really a compilation of probably earlier works and earlier manuscript editions and put together into one, right?
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
Yeah. Well, I took the position for this book
Yeah.
that I will accept the scholarly consensus in the field.
Okay.
Regarding 2 points. Is the Manu Smriti a work of one author or many?
Yeah.
That is it a unitary text in some sense?
Yeah.
And 2, its date. Now, most modern scholars seem to converge in the view that it should be assigned to the 2nd century.
Yeah.
So I accept that. But then we should also realize that many other dates are up for grabs in Indian chronology of that period. So if the dates are moved, we'll have to move perhaps more late than one.
Yeah.
So my argument might still be valid.
Right.
Though the chronological period involved might shift because we have moved the dates.
Sure.
What to me seemed very important was the result of Ashoka's policies and the reaction to that on the part of those who thought that their suffering could be traced to his policies.
Yeah.
This has been neglected, I think. And I found it extremely telling that the inscription of Samudragupta should be found on an Ashokan pillar.
Right. And what did the inscription say?
His inscription is an account of his Digvijay, which contrasts so sharply with the Dharma Vijay of Ashoka.
Right. Right. Right.
So it is as if he is pointing to the irony of the situation.
Right.
That this is what you thought, or maybe sarcasm even, that this is what you thought is the duty of the king. I am telling you what kings do.
That's very interesting, right? Because Ashoka's, Dharma Vijay was basically going out and saying, the Buddhist Dharma, ahimsa, and those kind of lovely things. Whereas, the flip side is Samudragupta is going out and saying, no, king's job is to expand and grow. And
you don't disband the army, which almost was the result.
Yeah.
Ashoka boasts that the the sounding of kettle drums
Yeah.
has been replaced by the preaching of dharma.
Yeah.
So he's marginalizing the army.
Which is very fascinating given the fact his grandfather,
Yes.
mustered this massive army to hold the Greeks back and to form
Yeah.
this, this country or the first empire in India. And it's just what a
Actually,
juxtaposition, right?
it provides a very interesting comparison with China. Because in China, around the same time, the same thing was happening.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, it was to happen a little later. The Qing dynasty had united China by sheer force, brute
Yeah.
force, and was followed by the Han. Now, in India, the Nandas are notorious for their cruelty.
Right.
They had done what the Qing dynasty did in China, and the Mauryas were like the Han. But the central administrative system, which the Mauryan dynasty had evolved, broke down under Ashoka.
Wow.
Whereas in China, that system continued till 1911.
That's right. That's a 2,300 year continuation, 400 year continuation in the
Yes.
Chinese sense, and the Indian sense lasted for less than 200
Yeah.
years.
And so our the development of the feudal structure of society
Yeah.
and the Samantas took the place of the centralized bureaucracy.
Oh, that's interesting that due to Ashoka's destruction or not maintenance of the central bureaucracy, these guilds, these shrenis, these various other economic entities arose and kind of
No. The point is that when you don't have a strong central administration,
right,
the administration gets localized.
right,
So
okay,
you have
yeah,
local rulers who have taken over.
and they all have different systems and different ways of doing it.
Right. And so you have ultimately in the Gupta period, post-Gupta period, you have the monarch, and then you have the various feudal lords, kind of,
Yeah.
instead of the centralized bureaucracy.
So the Guptas didn't try to recreate a centralized bureaucracy at all.
I
They
don't
just
think so. No.
okay.
They went in for the other system. Yeah.
The vassal kingdoms and
Yeah.
things of that nature. Okay, that's fascinating, right? Because like it's then even the Mahabharata reflects some kind of a central bureaucracy system, doesn't it? In its readings.
I haven't read the Mahabharata from that angle. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Arthashastra clearly represents a centralized bureaucracy.
Right.
And the fact that the study of the Arthashastra declined in India is a very interesting development.
Right. Why is that? I mean, it's such a powerful text. It seems like
I was always been puzzled by this, and I asked a very well-known cultural historian of India, Professor G.C. Pandey.
yeah.
And Professor G.C. Pandey said that it's a realpolitik text, the Arthashastra. And the Buddhists and the Jains and the Hindu liberals, quote unquote, of that time attacked that approach.
Okay.
And then gradually, the Dharma Shastra became dominant over the Arthashastra.
Right. And the Dharma Shastra is anything but realpolitik.
Yes, yeah. Or at least it doesn't give it the same importance.
Right, right.
So it's very
But some elements of Arthashastra still adhere in
yes,
the Dharma Shastras.
yes. They were actually Manu is the first one to incorporate some elements of polity into his work
Right,
and in the Smriti.
right,
So this may be a result of the recognition that you cannot ignore the political realm.
right. Yeah, right. Because the Dharma Sutras before don't talk about the political realm.
Yeah.
They
And
don't actually. Yeah,
it's almost like the RSS discovering after it was banned, after Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, that
yeah.
you must have the Jansang.
What's interesting on this point too, Dr. Sharma is the okay. So Alavelli makes an argument that the Dharmashastra, I mean, Manu Smriti and the Arthashastra are in conversation with each other in some sense, right? And might have been compiled roughly around the same time. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
I will defer to his, scholarship in the area because he has
Yeah,
made a thorough study of it. But I've always been a little skeptical of not taking the uniform Indic tradition seriously. That the Arthashastra is the work of Kautilya,
right.
of the Mauryan, of who was the wazir or the chief advisor of Chandragupta.
Hmm.
See, there are some traditions. Okay, we know that in Hindu lore and in Indic lore, we have many views and speculations and folk tales.
Yeah, like Vikramaditya, right?
But there are two or three things on which there is a surprising measure of unanimity. One is that somebody by the name of Vyas arranged the Vedas.
Hmm.
This is the unanimous Indic tradition. And somebody by the name of Kautilya wrote their Shastra.
Right.
So it may have to be revised in the view of our modern studies,
Yeah.
but I would be very cautious in doing so.
Right. It's interesting because even in the Mahabharata scholarship, most scholars would say Mahabharata is this compilation of a text written over 800 years or whatever. Well, Alf, a Heidelbeidel, and even I think Madeline Berardeau will make the argument that it probably was written by a single author or a small group of authors in the first 2 centuries before the Common
Exactly,
Era.
the shorter period and the longer period argument.
Yeah.
But there's a third argument
Yeah.
that the whole text is purely a work of imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on these arguments?
Well, I think regarding the whole work as the work of imagination,
Hmm.
unless we have very good grounds for it, I think is going a bit too far.
Yeah.
I'm more inclined to accept the view that something like the war may have occurred, which
Hmm.
got embellished with the passage of time and so on.
Right.
But to dismiss it outright is like us saying, you know, the Second World War really never took place.
Yeah.
This is an imaginary concoction of some historians on the basis of the First World War.
Right. 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 But critical scholars will take the position, like for example, even in Western scholarship on, let's say, the Torah or the Jewish histories, they'll say there was probably no Exodus the way the Exodus is described in the Book of Exodus,
Yes,
but there was probably some sort of movement of people leaving the Levant, moving into I mean, not Levant, but leaving Egypt, moving into the Levant
yes,
area.
yeah.
So, yeah, is that what you're
Yes,
indicating
that's my
too?
present position, depending
Yeah.
on the evidence, yeah,
Yeah.
as it emerges, yeah. And you know, there's very, very interesting point. In Mahabharata, we find a statement in relation to the Mahabharata that in the fifth line from descent,
Mhm.
after I think Janmejay,
Yeah.
there's a person by the name of Nichakshu. And
Yeah.
in his time, the capital city of Hastinapur was subject to a major flood in the Ganga River.
Yeah.
Now, Bibilal, who excavated that place, has really found archaeological confirmation of this.
Right.
And I think it places it between 800 BC to 1100, something like that.
Yes. 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 That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So here we have, in a way, an archaeological confirmation of the literary tradition.
Right.
So we should take it, I think, more seriously.
Right. It's interesting too because even in the Vedas themselves, there's references to Shantanu, Janamejaya, and Parikshit, right?
Yeah.
And maybe they're the same Shantanu, Janamejaya, and Parikshit that the Mahabharata is talking about. But if you take the academic scholars dating the Vedas roughly between, let's say, 1800 and 1200 BCE, that seems to maybe touch the same points that chronology.
Yeah, there is a lot of problem around that, because if you place the Vedas in 1500,
Yeah.
then, and the rest of the history, then by 6th century BCE, you have the Janpadas and all that. You do not leave enough room for the epic period. And so you dismiss the epics as mere acts of imagination.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the epic period gives a sense of a society that's not as quite Janapada, but not the way the Rig Veda is talking about its
Exactly.
society. Okay.
So now the problem is that there are all these lists of dynasties in the Puranas and so on. So you dismiss them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But why would somebody just manufacture those lists? I mean, I would need to have good reasons. I think there's a real problem in fixing the date of the Rig Veda in 1500 BC. And this was
go ahead.
already spotted by Winternitz, who was a pupil of Max Muller, who suggested this chronology orientally.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think the date of the Rig Veda is a bit older than 1500. Now, I'm not gonna take like these crazy positions like Nilesh Oak and say it's 22,000 BCE and Mahabharata happened in 5,000 BCE. I mean, there's part of the problem, I think, and this touches your earlier point that the study of religion and the study of texts in India by people is still so built up into this belief around the text instead of actually critically engaging with text.
Yeah. So we actually need a good conference on the date of the Rig Veda.
Yeah.
And I would make the even further proposal that you get all these scholars together and ask them to give us what may I call the minimum date, in the sense that they all agree that the Rig Veda cannot be later than a particular date.
Yeah.
They may not be agreed upon how old it is.
Yeah. But I hear you. I'm also trying to talk to Dr. Ashok yeah, I want to get him on too.
You must, yeah.
Because he's done work on this.
Yes, he has done a lot of work on this.
Yeah, and I'm also trying to talk to Stephanie Jameson because I want her views, and there's quite a few scholars in that study this, and it's such a fascinating topic, right? Just the Rig Veda is it's underread and overstated by many people.
Very well put.
Yeah, and it is a brilliant. I mean, there's so much in there, but it seems to be covering a large period of time. The text itself, it's clearly not in one time period. It's covering it.
But that's the inherent in the concept of the Rig Veda itself.
Yes.
In the sense that it's a compilation.
Yeah.
Everybody accepts that. The tradition has already claimed that it's a compilation.
Right.
And therefore, I mean, if I were to compile a history of British literature, English literature now, I may have passages from Chaucer and passages from Shaw. It will cover the whole period.
That's right.
So I compiled it now. You can have a date for the compilation.
Yes.
But the material compiled could go further back.
Right. So then what are your thoughts on the Rig Vedas in the sense of the compilation? And it's, how do I put this? I mean, not the dating as much, but how long do you think it took to compile that Rig Veda, in your assessments?
This is very hard to answer, but the person who has attempted to answer this, person name eludes me at the moment, is a very well-known figure. Is an Indian scholar who, in association with Coonrad Elst.
Oh, okay. Is Shrikant Talagiri?
Yes,
Is that
yes.
okay?
And you must take Ashoka Kalishkar's view on him,
Yeah,
on his work,
yeah,
because Ashoka Kalishkar is a very good scholar of Sanskrit and Vedic Sanskrit.
yeah.
So he would be able to express more defensible, intellectually defensible views
Right.
than
I
I
mean,
can on this.
I think Madhav
Deshpande,
Deshpande,
yeah,
he takes different views on this, but
yeah, exactly. So we should
he's
have
more
both of
aligned
them.
with like
Modern,
Witzel and yeah.
yes, yes.
But it is interesting. So, I mean, on a brief like tangent, how do you manage to work around both your academic scholarly mindset towards the text and then your belief or your practice of these of the traditions and understanding it in like a believer sense?
I see here the nature of Hinduism. We should keep this is a central point to keep in mind. Hinduism is not a historical tradition.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? Judaism is based on a historical event, the Exodus.
Hmm.
Christianity is based on a historical event. Islam is based on a historical event. But Hinduism is Sanatan. So the teachings of Hinduism, leading the life as a Hindu, is not disturbed if the Vedas are assigned to 6,000 BC or 1,000 BC.
Right.
Or even if you say that the Vedas are purely fictional.
Or you say
Because,
they happened yesterday. It doesn't matter.
yeah, because the point would not be whether they are true or false in this sense, but whether they conduce to your spiritual search. So any
That's
text.
that's very interesting. So in the sense of when you say when the tradition says the Vedas are Purusheya, what do they mean by that? Like, because I think it's such a misunderstood concept of what a Purusheya means.
Yeah. I have a view, I have a personal view on that. Let me share that first and then I'll give you the general view. My view is this: there's something known as the genetic fallacy. What
Yeah.
comes to mind when I use the word genetic fallacy?
Basically that the connection between two things is indicative of yeah.
That by impugning the origin or genesis of a certain statement, you discredit it. Yeah, that's a very important concept. For instance, if somebody is talking about, say, Hinduism and say, oh, you are saying this because you are a Brahman or a Kshatriya, right. Yeah, there is a genetic fallacy in that. The fallacy is that the validity of the statement, whether it is true or false, correct or incorrect,
Depend on the sayer.
Depends on the correspondence of the statement to facts, not on the author.
Right.
You might say that the credibility of the statement depends on the author, not the truth.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Right. So when they say the Vedas are without author means, you cannot impugn their authority by saying that, oh, the guys who wrote this were rascals. So it is a mythological expression of a logical point, namely the genetic fallacy. This is Hinduism's way of avoiding the genetic fallacy when it comes to the Vedas.
Interesting. Yeah.
So this is how I see the whole idea of Apaurushya. Now there's a further convolution to this, or maybe it's a clarification, that according to the Hindu hermeneutical tradition, what is the importance of the Vedas? is the geographical detail provided by them is of main focus or interest to us? Are the historical details, the social realities? No. According to people already in the 4th century BC, and certainly according to Shankara, Ramanuja, all these people, there are only 2 matters in which the Vedas are authoritative. One, matters of dharma, and 2, matters of moksha.
Yeah.
So you have
or the nature of Brahman, right?
Right, yeah. Ultimate reality.
Yeah.
So ultimately we find a very striking statement by Shankara that even if 1,000 scriptures were to tell us that fire is cold, we will have to disregard them.
Right.
Because they're speaking out of their jurisdiction.
Which I think is a brilliant, if you don't understand the pramanas of the way the Hindu thinkers approached it, I don't think you can understand how to read the text.
Yes.
Right. And this is important because this is, for me, it was one of the, when I read the Brahma Sutra Bhashyas and this statement was made, it's like, well, if the text, what you're saying is pratyaksha is paramount.
Paramount for worldly matters.
Exactly. So each pramana has its own area of importance. And if they cross that, then it doesn't have the same level of validity.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now you can see, and say same thing as Buddhism. Whether the Buddha lived or not is immaterial. Really. Because the Buddha says, whether the Buddhas arise or do not arise,
yeah,
these things will remain true.
yeah. But it's interesting that, because I say the same thing when I talk to people about the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So what if Krishna didn't walk this earth? Does it change what the Gita is telling you? Was it change what the Mahabharata is telling you? I mean, I could still believe that Krishna walked the earth, but it's not relevant to the truth of what's being said here, right?
Yeah. So it all
very
goes
interesting.
Back.
Yeah.
So all goes back to the fact that these are not historical traditions, unlike Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Right.
So that is why early missionaries or scholars might have thought we have disproved the existence of Krishna or Ram, so Hinduism will collapse.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Islam might collapse if you can prove that the Prophet never existed.
Right.
But that doesn't work with Hinduism.
No, it doesn't. But this is also brings up an interesting question that I struggle with watching in today's Hindu like society, is this desire to historicize everything too, right? There's a push, especially when you look at stuff coming out of India. There's this deep desire to have these things to be historically true and to prove it's true, and I find that that's such a, and that it seems to cut against the grain of what Hindu thought has been for millennia.
Well, I mean, the Hinduism also has a historical tradition.
Sure.
Yeah. And Hindus might be within their rights to claim that a person has been assigned to the wrong time period.
Sure. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. And it's entirely depend on the evidence. So I think here we have to just accept the idea that we are moving into a different realm of jurisdiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
From a certain point of view, from a point of view of your religious life, it does not matter whether so-and-so really existed or not.
Right.
But from the point of view of your life as a historian, you may think that there is evidence to support so-and-so existed, and others think they don't. They did not, so you can debate the point. Yeah.
Dr. Sharma, you've done a lot of work in comparative and interfaith work. What has been your experience in how Hinduism is engaged with by other traditions, like say the Abrahamic traditions, has there been a movement towards more treating them as equals and in a conversation, or is it still looking down upon like the difference in the Hindu worldview?
Okay, at the academic level, what you are saying is true.
Yeah,
That religions are treated on par in the comparative study of religion, in the study of world religions.
yeah.
Yes. But in other areas of the academia and in the popular opinion,
Hmm.
I think this is not the case. One has to keep a fundamental fact in mind here that for a Hindu, a non Hindu does not constitute a problem.
Right.
A non Hindu is not a theological problem.
I
It
agree.
does not compromise the Hindu in his integrity in any way.
Yeah.
But for a non Hindu, especially of the Abrahamic tradition, and especially for the missionary members of that tradition, Christianity and Islam, the Hindu is a problem.
How do you explain them?
Yeah. That is to say, he holds on to a belief which challenges their belief that they are the only path.
Yeah.
So either he has to be converted or done away with. If one takes the extreme view,
Right.
both these traditions also have a sub-tradition which is more generous in its assessment of the non-Christian or the non-Muslim. Yeah. But the mainline version, unless it has been secularized as in the West, still a problem. Now, the Hindus are not aware of this. And so they are unable to assess properly the attitudes which non-Hindus have towards them.
Right.
And they have to overcome this ignorance.
And do you think that so living in the West, much of the diaspora is not even very well acquainted with Hinduism I would say in any real sense, and maybe their first intellectual engagement would happen probably in your class in McGill University, where they actually learn about the Gita or any of these things. Um, how would you say for them to come to terms with this and learn about this and address these concerns that you're bringing up?
Yeah, see, in the academic, because the West has become secularized now,
Yeah,
so one does not have that problem in a big way. And even when that problem is raised in more formally Christian circles,
right,
it is raised in the form of how can we have harmonious or cordial relations
right.
with people who are non-Christians, So you have the development of dialogue and the development of interfaith activities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in your time while you've been teaching, have you had a lot of young Hindu students after engaging with your work and other like other professors? Has there been a push in young Hindu scholars to enter into scholarship for doing the kind of work you're doing? Because when like who you're going to pass the torch on to, and who's going to within the tradition take up these things. Not that many Hindus study Hinduism academically.
Yeah, but I did not formally learn Hinduism from somebody.
Yeah.
I learned it through the tradition. So I learned it through the works of people like T.M.P. Mahadevan, Professor S. Radhakrishnan,
Yes.
but I was never the student in the formal sense.
Right.
So what we leave behind us if we don't have a family are our books.
Yeah. That's a fair point because sometimes I wonder, in academia, there aren't very many Hindu practitioners who are also academics that can bring that element. Like there's a few, right? There's like, Edward Bryant, Jeffrey Long, there's Dr. Ashoka, and then but Vasudhanaran, there's quite a few, but a large portion of the people that are pushing the I guess academia forward are not Hindu practitioners. Whereas in Christian or Muslim theology departments, it's overly overwhelmed with believers, right?
Yes, and the same is true also of, interestingly, Buddhism.
Yeah,
So there is this asymmetry when it comes to Hinduism. And we can only hope that more and more Hindu scholars, Hindu academics, and
yeah,
Hindu students who are thinking of their planning their career would like to go into the field of the study of religion,
yeah.
where they can bring both these perspectives to bear on both the insider and the outsider.
Yeah, it's a very very interesting dilemma. Oh, by the way, I totally forgot to mention, congratulations on your Padma Shri award that you just received, or is it Padma Bhushan?
It's a Padma Shri. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Yeah, it was a
Yes.
very pleasant surprise. Yes.
Yeah, it's such a great honor. So congratulations. And you've written so many works, and they cover a lot of different, you have the theological elements, you have the social elements, the historical elements, right? You write about feminism and Hinduism or human rights. What area has been like your personal, like what I would say, what pulls your heart, what you would love to do constantly if you could, in terms of an area of study or inquiry?
Well, I think contemporary Hinduism. See, what form, in what direction should we move as Hindus?
Okay.
Yeah, all
So I
that
would love
I've
to hear your
done.
thoughts on that. Yeah.
Oh no, it's kind of, I have some thoughts on that. Yeah, forming some thoughts which are taking shape.
Yeah.
But the wide range which you refer to is all ultimately with a view to determining what form our tradition should take now, because we shape it basically.
Right. So where do you think, so in this sense of we shape, so we have, this, I guess the one albatross, which we did kind of discuss in part, is the ideas within Hinduism that people are, when you ever hear about it, it's always caste, cows, and curry, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Caste just tends to be like this, the big albatross sitting around the neck. How do you address that and think about that in both
And
in historical and modern contexts?
okay, historical context, of course, Hinduism is a plural tradition.
Yeah.
So you will find many perspectives on it, on the idea of Varna and Jati. A richness which is missing in many of the presentations. Yeah. But I'll only say that much about the past. I'm interested in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And I would take the position, for instance, on Varna. In terms of the history of Hinduism, that Hinduism has several ideas, key ideas, which it reworks.
Yeah.
So let us look at the Veda. So you have the Vedas, you have the three Vedas, then they become the four Vedas, then the Mahabharata becomes the fifth Veda,
Mm-hmm.
then the Tiruvaimuri becomes the Tamil Veda, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so on. So the word was still there, and we have evidence that in medieval times, the word Veda was used to refer to the revelations of all religions.
Really?
Yes.
Buddhism, Jainism, all that stuff was called
Especially
Veda?
Islam.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, medieval times, in some circles.
Yeah.
So this is how we see the Veda being reworked, the idea being reworked.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a total departure from the original position, but consistently with the original position, it accepts new developments.
Yeah.
as part of it. Same thing happens with the idea of yajna. So in the beginning, you just make some offerings
Yeah.
in the Rig Veda. In the Brahmana, when you come to the Brahmanas, you start killing animals. And then you have a movement against killing animals, very prominently in Buddhism and Jainism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also partly as a result of that, and partly as the cruel nature of Hinduism, you have a sentiment against yajnas building up. So by the time you come to the Bhagavad Gita, it says, the 18th chapter, anyone who is studying this text is performing jnana yajna.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Swami Chinmayanand used to hold his sessions on the Gita and he used to call them jnana yajna.
Yeah.
So the basic idea of yajna is something sacred, something you do, you make some sacrifice, you enrich your spiritual life, continues. It takes all these forms without feeling that it is betraying its original conception.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I have a suggestion to make about Varna.
Mm.
And that is that in an age in which literacy was limited, longevity was limited,
Right.
mobility was limited, you could use birth as an index of Varna.
Mm-hmm.
Because life was not going to change, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Life would be more of the same where you were born. Yeah. But now, when we have longevity, we are now living at least 70 years now, more than that on an average.
Yeah.
We have mobility. There's so many Indians overseas and so on. And we have literacy. Now it makes sense that the same person contains all the four varnas within himself or herself.
Right.
Because one has a head, one should do some scriptural study. Because one has arms, one should have some training in self-defense. Because one has thighs, one should have a vocation. And because one has feet, one should perform service.
Right.
Same person. Same person now is Sarvavarnik.
Yeah.
And this is how we will continue to believe in Varna and Ashram, but with this primary meaning.
Right. And then, so it's interesting because that meaning, that's taking the position, which I do agree, is that the tradition isn't dead. It's always moving and changing and forming itself. But many people, when I see traditionalists, they talk as if these texts are fixed and unchangeable and immovable, right?
No.
Like, so, how's your response to them?
Chir Puratan, Nitya Nutan. Hinduism is hermeneutics.
Yes.
Right from the beginning. Each tradition is hermeneutics. The traditions fail when they fail to keep up with the times.
Yeah.
And the way to keep up with the times is to develop the hermeneutics.
Right.
Right from the beginning, we have, who is this? Durgacharya, commentator on the Nirukta, says somewhere, Yavanto, eteshu yavanto artha utpadderan, sarvevate yogya. All meanings which arise from these texts are acceptable. He even says that there's nothing wrong with this, not praparadhosti.
That's interesting.
Already in the Nirukt itself, this is a commentary on the Nirukt.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, around 13th century. But the other one, Nirukta itself gives several interpretations of the way.
No, it is interesting because it is because I mean the question then it becomes I think people would ask is Hinduism let you do anything? Is it a free for all?
No, it's not a free for all because with the new interpretation, it does impose certain things on you. You have
Yeah,
to study the Vedas,
yeah,
learn the self defense, have vocational training,
right,
and perform social service.
right.
There is a
So
corresponding, yeah.
no, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, I'm just saying the fact that you have reinterpreted it does
Yeah.
not mean that you have been freed from all responsibilities.
No, which is very interesting, right? Because Krishna himself is reinterpreting the Vedic world when he's talking about
Yes.
the Gita in the Gita, right? Patram pushpam palam toyam, right?
Uh-huh.
He's saying simply this Vedic rite you used to do. You don't need to do all that for me. You could just do
Ekat,
this.
एकत्वेन पृथक एकत्वेन पृथक्त्वेन बहुधा विश्वतो मुखम. This is
Yeah, yeah,
from the Gita itself.
yeah.
One meaning, many meanings, and
Vishwatomukam.
Vishwato Mukham, as many
Yeah.
as you can have.
No, but that's a beautiful aspect of the tradition, which I think sometimes people lose track of the fact that it's a living tradition. It's not meant to like even it part of the when people are like, well, people kept adding to Manu or keep adding to Mahabharata, and in my mind, I was thinking that's the purpose of the
That's the
text.
whole
You,
point. Yeah.
yeah,
My critique of the critical edition was
yeah,
from not as an academic, from the perspective of the tradition.
yeah,
The Mahabharata is not to be pruned down; it has to grow.
yeah. That's right. Yeah, yeah. All the variations are brought together because
Yeah.
it's something you learn from it. I mean, the scholarly objective is different. Is to try, obviously to understand what is the ur text, if there is such a
At that
thing,
time,
or
yeah, yeah.
yeah. But it is interesting to me. Like I feel, growing up in the West and growing up, amongst a lot of Hindus, it's just there's so much lack of knowledge by my own peers of the tradition, these ideas. And so when even like I know artists, people trained in Carnatic music and Bharatanatyam who are now, doing very well. And the way they approach these texts is constant, like, oh, it's anti-feminism, it's
Yes.
and it's casteist, it's just, we have to. And I'm like, what are we doing? Are we torturing these texts to get to our ideas about, what makes sense in this modern age of
So
our
the
own
thing,
views?
the best answer to those people is that the tradition is plural.
Yeah.
Plural means it will have everything, good and bad.
Yeah.
Your standards of good and bad are also going to change with time.
Right.
That is why it's such a comprehensive tradition. That is why it is Sanatan. It is offering you all these options. Now make your choice. That's your karma.
Yeah, no, well, I agree with you. The someone from a theological element would be like, what kind of tradition changes over time? If it's the will of God, why isn't the will of God expressed from the get-go? Why isn't slavery banned in Manu or casteism banned in
Yeah.
Manu or if it's inherently evil as a moral principle?
You see, the problem is, I think that on the one hand, we do not know enough about our tradition.
Yeah,
On the other hand, whatever little we know about it, we imagine in terms of a Western notion of religion,
yeah, yeah.
which is restrictive and formal and authoritarian.
Hmm.
So there is a double whammy.
Right,
Not only do they don't know what it is, they also, whatever little they know of it, they cast in this religion mold.
right.
So things are changing a bit now. There is a more discussion of over the past decade, I think, the tradition, its vitality. I mean, I was completely stunned that if the figures are true for the Kumbha,
Yeah.
1 out of every 2 Hindu in India has been there. This is mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's uh and they went to one location for a small period of time.
Yes.
So, in this sense, let me ask you this. And I know I don't want to take too much more of your time. I know you have a full day. Um, do you think Hinduism should be studied as a religion, or should each of those traditions within Hinduism be studied as a religion? Like, maybe Gaudiya Vaishnavism and Trika Shaivism. Is that the religion versus the Hindu umbrella? I mean, how do we understand Hinduism in the context of religion? Because we're saying we're force fitting these things.
Now, see, when I made the contrast about our own self understanding and religion,
Yeah,
the Western concept of religion has certain features to it,
yeah,
that it is conclusive, that it is separative, that it is exclusive,
hmm,
that it is competitive. Yeah?
yeah.
Now, Hinduism is none of these.
So,
It
yeah,
is
I mean, that's fair.
continuous revelation. You don't have to cease to be a Christian to be a Hindu.
Yeah,
Yeah. You don't believe that only Hindus will be saved.
yeah,
You don't think Hinduism is in competition with other religions, just as I am not in competition with you.
right.
Our being two human beings affirms our humanity, common humanity. Similarly, the other religion affirms religion rather than
Yeah.
being a competitor. It affirms my tradition in the sense that you might affirm me.
Right. So in this context, so like for example, that's why I asked like Madhva, for example, in his Dvaita philosophy,
Yeah.
takes this perspective that if you're not a Vishnu Bhakta, if you don't have this, then you might have eventually go to Andhatamas, right?
Yes, true.
Those are things that appear mutually antagonistic to what
No,
you
no,
just said.
very good example, because he would say that yes, the fellow will go to hell.
Yeah.
Hinduism as a whole does not say this.
Right.
That Hinduism is a plural tradition. No position in Hinduism is final, can be final, including this one.
Sure.
That is why
Sure.
it has room for possible final positions, like Madhva. But were Madhva to take over the whole tradition,
Yeah.
it will become like an Abrahamic tradition.
Okay. I mean, but that's interesting too, right? Because then do traditions within Hinduism preserve Abrahamic like elements?
Yes.
And what prevents them from becoming the whole Hinduism becoming
Uh,
Abrahamic is because it allows it all to be
that
a
is
playing field.
what prevents American democratic system from being destroyed when it allows for a communist party to function within it.
Right.
It does
Right.
not allow it to take over.
So let me ask you this question, because then it's very interesting to me. Then what is Hinduism? If it's an umbrella term, but it also seems to have its own nature. And it's interesting because it's not a religion, but it's something else.
Yes.
It's like an
So,
ecosystem, right?
so let me share with you the view of my mentor, Professor Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who famously said, there are Hindus, but there is no Hinduism.
Okay.
So what was he trying to say? He was trying to say was that you can identify a Hindu, but you can't define Hinduism,
Right.
except as the sum total of the beliefs and practices of all these Hindus.
Okay. So then how do you approach and this is where it gets interesting is like that, then if it's just beliefs and practices of people, then why is it true? Why is the concept of Brahman real if everyone has
Yeah.
different concepts of
Is
Brahman?
it true? Is it not true? Find out. This is what Hinduism tells you. Find out.
Yeah.
Here are all the views. Here are all possible approaches to the truth, the ultimate
Right.
reality. Figure out.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting. So Dr. Sharma, I would love to have you back on because I think this is such a fascinating and your wealth of knowledge and I would love to talk about like the feminism work you've done, the work on like human rights, just war. There's so much that we can cover. I want to give you an opportunity to, is there anything else that you think right now we can discuss, or any thoughts that you're what you're working on, or anything going on your end?
No, that is fine. We have covered a lot of very interesting topics, and
Yeah,
I'll be happy to talk further on any of them.
absolutely. So what are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm trying to write a survey of Indic civilization in all its aspects.
Yeah.
That is the formal academic enterprise I have in mind.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, also interesting on the issue of languages,
Hmm.
which will take us away from our immediate concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love.
Because languages are carriers of culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are regarding them only as means of communication, which is fine, but we are overlooking the fact that they are also carriers of culture.
Yeah.
And this has implications to the extent to which we allow English to dominate our public life.
Right.
So that's something I'm trying to think through my way through.
Right. No, it's very interesting. We're conversing in that language. We probably think in that language in some sense, which restricts our use of vocabulary and terms and ideas. It is a very interesting concept, I think.
Right. Somebody asks you what is your caste,
Yeah.
and somebody asks you what is your Varna.
Yeah.
You see the difference right there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody asks you what is your religion, and somebody asks you what is your dharma.
Yeah.
And right there, the world has shifted.
Yes.
World of meaning has shifted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. This will be like what, book 50? I think you've written something close to like 50 books.
Who's counting? Who's counting?
No, Dr. Sharma, again, appreciate your time. And I will definitely have you back on in the next hopefully in the next couple weeks or months to discuss these other books. I have to go through because I have quite a few of your books. I'm reading through them again. And I remember I read quite a few of your articles. I got introduced to you in my college years when I was reading articles of yours that you've written on like Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, and on the philosophical aspects of Hindu thought, which we didn't even cover, but that's the breadth that you show, I think is pretty amazing. Not many other scholars cover the human rights element, the law element, Manu Smriti, the Vedanta, and it's it's an honor, and I can see why you've got the Padma Shri. So thank you, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening, and I'll add Dr. Sharma's website and book location where you get his stuff. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.
पावन मुनि जन यमुना तीरे पावन मुनि जन यमुना तीरे गायति वनमाली गायति वनमाली गायति वनमाली